Destination mark.
Crash is getting a new game. It looks amazing. Just thought I'd open with that. So it seems everything I'd been talking about with Crash for the last 3 Comeback Saga videos has finally paid off. I don't want to say I told you so, but... Anyway, hi. I'm back with part 3 finally. I like to pride myself on my timely uploads, so even though I've taken just a tiny break in between each episode of the Comeback Saga, I'm back and ready at last to talk about this little guy, Spyro the Dragon. Now in my billion-year absence since part 2, not only has Crash come out with a trailer for a brand new game, but the Spyro brand has been revitalized with Reignited Trilogy, and the dragons even made a playable appearance in CTR Nitro-Fueled. Crash and Spyro are brothers from other mothers, so when Crash's original trilogy got remastered, it was absolutely no surprise Spyro's would be too. But I think the question we need to ask ourselves about that is why? Why did Spyro come back in this fashion? And is this the way he should have come back? Well, if you're seeing this, it means I think I finally found the answer. And we've got a lot to talk about to get there. So, funky transition! So to answer the question of why did Spyro come back with a trilogy remaster, I think we first need to answer this question. What constitutes a remaster of a video game? As we've seen, a ton of other remastered games have risen up since Insane and Reignited. Shadow of the Colossus, Medieval, Destroy All Humans, SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom Rehydrated, which just came out not too long ago, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 1+2, which is Vicarious Vision's next project after Insane, and recently announced from the PS5 reveal event is Demon's Souls, also from Bluepoint who did Shadow of the Colossus. There are so many remasters, all with their own reasons for existing. But for Spyro, very specific things came together to make Reignited happen. So in this video, we'll be going over those points and determining why Reignited deserved to happen, and if the remaster route was the best one for the Spyro brand to take in its revitalization. The first point we need to consider is where Spyro was before Reignited. Yes, that's right, Skylanders. I'll make this point brief, as you all already know my stance on this series. However, that stance has slightly altered over time from nearly hating it back then to a more subdued meh nowadays. But that doesn't mean Skylanders will be getting off the hook that easily. I had once gone through and combed as many cutscenes and events through nearly every console Skylanders game I could find, and I still couldn't find any relevant Spyro stuff. He's meant to be the leader of the pack, but in-game he's treated and handled like any other character you can switch between. He doesn't stand out as being more relevant unless he needs to be in the franchise's marketing, which to me was always very wrong. Everything about this unsettled me back then. The marketing, the plethora of toys, Spyro's look. I'm just glad Paul Yen and Josh Nadelberg cleared things up and said it themselves in Reignited's first ever interview, that the Spyro and Skylanders brands, and by extension the different characterizations of Spyro, are indeed two separate entities.
The original Spyro back in that it's a different character from the Spyro that you see in Skylanders. So that Spyro influenced a lot of that going into Skylanders, but these are completely different. We want to make sure that we're true to that original memory.
So Skylanders lasted from 2011 to 2016, and finally by Game 6 in Imaginators, Spyro was given a little more of a leadership role in the story, even visiting the Thumpin Wumpa Islands to help out Crash in his separate story, which means Imaginators serves as the current resting point for the mainline Skylanders series, and it paved the revival of both Crash and Spyro's brands. As weird as it is for me to admit, but briefly putting my feelings for the series aside, that means Skylanders was integral in keeping Spyro's character in the spotlight, for all that it actually did. So when Reignited was announced, kids who knew him from Skylanders would immediately recognize him. Now on to the next point, the remaster itself. Handling something as big as Spyro is no easy task. Hell, even something as smaller scale as Crash is no big task. And if Part 1 taught us anything, yeah. So even though the games look, sound, and play fantastically, and Toys for Bob even created an entire program called Spyroscope meant to scale each level and world and get all the enemy, chest, and gem placements as close to the original games as possible, Reignited was still met with heavy criticisms. Even as Toys for Bob would actively change colors and set pieces around to fit the demand, there was still this desire for a one-to-one recreation, which, let me tell you now as I did back then, was never going to happen. Let me introduce you to what I call the circle analogy. Say I stood in as Insomniac and drew a circle on a piece of paper, the circle being the original Spyro trilogy. Then my brother comes in and decides he wants to make his own. He can use his own tools and look at my circle, study it, break it down. He can do whatever he wants to it. But as he recreates it, it's not gonna look completely identical. It can get close, and anyone he shows the two circles to may be pretty satisfied with how they look, but the more you realize how impossible of a task recreating it perfectly is, the more important it is to understand that that's okay. Bringing it back to Spyro, Reignited served its purpose. Like Insane for Crash, it was meant to bring Spyro's classic adventures and the original portrayal of the character himself back into the spotlight, and despite all the criticisms and issues it had, it still succeeded. And my last point is the relevancy. Why did this remaster come out when it did? Was it just to poop out something to celebrate 20 years of the series? Or was it meant to do much more? Well, looking back at Crash, I think it's safe to say yes. The remasters are doing much more than just celebrating a milestone. And Sane Trilogy was meant to reintroduce Crash's classic games and formula to a new audience. CTR Nitro-Fueled showed that audience that Crash can do more than just platforming. He can genre hop and still kill the competition with high-octane racing action, while reintroducing all kinds of elements from throughout the series to not just new fans, but us veterans who haven't seen some of these characters and racetracks in literal years. In some cases, even well over a decade. And now, Crash 4 It's About Time is the next step in Crash's comeback. Now that everyone's familiar with Crash and what he can do, we're getting a new game that remixes all of that and plans to give us a brand new, crazy good experience. Which is what I've been advocating for and said would happen since part 1, but I digress. I bring this up for Crash because I think the exact same can happen for Spyro. Will we get a game that acknowledges and celebrates all facets of Spyro's franchise like Nitro-Fueled did for Crash? I don't know, but can a brand new game arise to follow up Reignited and throw the dragon into an entirely new adventure now that we're all caught up on classic Spyro and what he can do? Absolutely. And therein lies our answer, folks. What constitutes a remaster of a video game? In my opinion, timing plays a huge part in that decision. It depends on what the flagship character and franchise overall was doing beforehand, what the remaster itself hopes to achieve, and if it's a feasible idea to release such a product for said franchise if it potentially leads to something bigger in the future. Look, I'm just gonna gush for a minute. I love these two franchises, dude. They're my childhood. If you sat me down back in 2010 and told me all this shit was gonna happen in 10 years, I would've laughed. But this is real. These games, these characters, these worlds, they're all back, and I've accepted them with the widest open arms. What I've been saying is coming to pass, and what the point of the Comeback Saga has been is to show you guys my stance on everything regarding the revival of these two, and how you should all maybe be a little less judgmental and a little more open-minded. And to Toys for Bob, I'm sorry for constantly dumping on Skylanders. It has a great gameplay premise and very interesting ideas. I just think the games could have been fleshed out more. And, you know, maybe Spyro could have stood to look a little cuter instead of, like, well, this. That's just me though. I know people disagree with me. But hey, you guys did an amazing job with Reignited, and I know you'll knock Crash 4 out of the park. So anyway, guess that's it. Almost 3 years in the making. Though I guess I'm glad that it took so long. As I'm wrapping up this trilogy, we've literally seen everything I've been talking about come to pass, which is honestly kind of cool. But I hope you guys have enjoyed my spiel on these two series, and let's see what the future holds for them. I'm Mark, and thanks for watching.
That's me, all right.